So this person right here is the cousin of JD Vance. He is a veteran of the Ukrainian armed forces. I believe he served with Da Vinci Wolves for 2 years, if I remember correctly. And he also was doing EOD stuff before he signed a contract, because I have some mutuals who worked with him when he was doing that EOD stuff. Either way, he fought in the Ukrainian armed forces for 2 years, did some EOD stuff a little bit before that, before signing a contract, and is a supporter of the Ukrainian armed forces, while also happening to be the cousin of JD Vance. So let me read you a statement from him, Nate Vance, on his cousin, and the meeting specifically between Zelensky and gang. Have you said thank you once, Mr. Vance asked the Ukrainian leader, accusing him of litigating in front of the American media. Nate Vance criticized his cousin's reception of Mr. Zelensky, saying the Yale Law School graduate was a good guy, intelligent, but was playing politics with Ukraine's future. When he criticized aid to Ukraine, I told myself that it was because he had to please a certain electorate, and that was the game of politics. But what they did to Zelensky was an ambush of absolute bad faith. He argued that Ukraine had put U.S. donations of military equipment, which Mr. Trump suspended on Monday as he piled pressure on Kiev to reach a peace deal with Moscow, to good use on the front lines. I was disappointed when J.D. Vance justifies his distrust of Zelensky by the reports he had seen. I thought I was going to choke, Nate Vance said to him. His own cousin was on the front lines. I could have told him the truth, without pretense, without personal interest. He never tried to find out more. He added that he had left messages with his cousin's office, but had never heard back. Nate Vance said he left Ukraine in January, shortly before his cousin became vice president, because it became complicated to stay. I couldn't take the risk of being captured, because he's the cousin of the vice president of the United States. Okay, so first off, this guy served for 2 years with Da Vinci's Wolves, okay? Those guys had seen some pretty hard fighting. I believe their leader was even killed in combat. These are some really pretty hard nationalist fighters. So he is, as far as I would know, if he served with them in the places that I know Da Vinci's Wolves fought, he had seen some pretty serious combat. Now, of course, I don't know what his role was specifically in the. I haven't listened to all of his interviews about all of his stories or whatever, but Da Vinci Wolves have seen some real fighting, and he worked with EOD stuff before that, I know. So this is a man who had really put his neck out there. And so I believe that he believes what he is saying here, right? But I will just say, okay, about JD Vance being a good guy and intelligent. He might be intelligent, but this guy said Donald Trump was heroin and then got on his campaign 3-4 years later. This guy said that he was willing to overturn an American election result because Trump told him to violate the Constitution after swearing an oath to the Constitution. I don't know if I would be calling him a good guy, but look, they're in the family, and I'm sure, JD Vance, has really cool, Magic the Gathering cards that he showed him at a family reunion. These are my Magic cards. And he was like, yes, Cousin Vance, they are your Magic cards, and they had a nice time. So I don't want to be the one to make the family reunion awkward. But isn't this interesting? Because you want to know another thing that's funny? RFK's family member also served over there. There seems to be this trend of, that's not really a trend. I don't know why, but there seems to be family members of very prominent anti-Ukraine politicians going over there. And it's happened twice. And if it happened, I'd have 2 nickels. If you had each nickel for each time, which, isn't a lot of money, but strange it happened twice. Very strange. Either way, he then comes back to the United States. JD Vance, sworn in as vice president. He has this scuff with Zelensky, and then Nate Vance starts to really take a public setting. He starts to go to the public, and I see him commentating and going to the news a lot more now. And in March, it's starting to pick up, and it's starting to get real attention. And so CNN took him and put him on the airwaves, and he didn't lay into his cousin as but he said he was wrong, and he confronted them, and he said that essentially that they were they were in the wrong, and that he believes that you need to continue support for Ukraine. I don't want to speak for him. Man went over to Ukraine and fought. He can speak for himself.
They don't necessarily think like we think, and I'm talking about their political class. I've personally witnessed them shooting their own troops on enough occasions that it wasn't just an isolated incident. It's happened quite a bit, enough to the point where you could consider it to be policy if troops are retreating. So these people, as a policy, will eat their own. So they will not hesitate to eat an American president or an American vice president.
They will not hesitate to eat J.D. Vance.
They don't care what we think. They're not our allies, and they never will be. Not at least for a generation.
Not at least for a generation. There's another statement he put out there about the beefing up of the Russian military-industrial complex. And what he says here, I think, is even more important than what he said in the other area. Because honestly, besides all the other critiques he's made, this is the worst thing that the United States could do when it comes to the war in Ukraine. If we lift the sanctions on the Russian war machine, they will build up the Russian military-industrial complex much more than they have now. They'll be able to get CNC machines. They'll be able to get parts that they weren't able to get before. And they will take machine components from our industries. They will take electronics for the innards of their drones, and they will bomb Ukraine much harder. And they will not dial down the war. I think they'll dial up the war. Or they'll just dial it up to prepare for the next war. Either way, the lifting of the sanctions without long-term security arrangements is just allowing them to prepare for the next war. So I think that this is probably his most important critique of his cousin.
I know that you've tried to reach out to your cousin since he took office, but haven't been successful. I mean, what were you planning to say to him? I mean, what do you want to say to him now in this moment?
Well, look, I mean, there's more than one reason why you could make the argument for supporting Ukraine. There's the, kind of emotional argument, the human element argument part of it. Which, fine, if that's the argument you want to make in order to support Ukraine, then I support that. There's also the element of how it will affect the United States long term, right? So if you're just more transactional in nature and you are concerned, what is the benefit for the United States? I don't think there's any scenario where like if this war pauses and sanctions are lifted, Russia has spent the last 3 years kind of beefing up their military-industrial complex. And if you lift those sanctions, you're going to see a massive influx of funds into that military-industrial complex. And they're going to build a war machine out of it, right? That's what they're going to do. And the concept of an imperialistic, aggressive, modernized military Russia who has learned their lessons about modern combat is problematic for our future. And if the Russians are given significant concessions in this ceasefire, they will spin that as a victory of sorts. But their view is they're not done. So to them, it's just a chance to regroup, build up and modernize, and they'll come back. And when they do come back, they'll be more of a problem than they are now. Right now, they're at the weakest they will ever be. As soon as the ceasefire starts, they will immediately start to get stronger and continue to get stronger every day thereafter. So the way this ends is important.
Blood isn't everything, it seems. So it's not JD's genes, apparently. It's just him. One last thing on this, though. JD Vance did respond to his cousin talking about him. And his response wasn't really that much of a substantive response, and more like a, come on. Why not do this in private? Which, I mean, he did say he tried to call his office and they didn't get a response. Vice President J.D. Vance responded Monday to the scathing critique from his cousin Nate of his strategy for the Russia-Ukraine war. Nate Vance, who has spent years as a volunteer fighter for Ukraine against Russia, spoke to the French publication Le Figaro on Sunday about his thoughts on the combative exchange between President Donald Trump and Vice President. We already read that. Donald Trump and my cousin clearly believe they can placate Vladimir Putin, he said. They're wrong. The Russians are not going to forget our support for Ukraine. We are Vladimir Putin's useful idiots. Nate Vance added that he had left messages with his cousin's office on the topic, given his experience on the front line. Nate Vance made similar comments on CNN's Eric Bernal. In a statement to Fox News Digital, Vice President Vance said that he never spoke publicly about his cousin's service because he didn't want to endanger his life more than it already was. As far as his criticisms, I have no interest in arguing with him in public, but I do feel that I need to address one issue in particular. His failed effort to contact me. I am unsure why Nate felt the need to reach out to my Senate office, rather to his mom, dad, or sister, all of whom I am in contact with regularly. The vice president added that he has always considered Nate the toughest guy he knew, and that he was always happy to talk to him. Honestly, I think Vance probably responded the smartest way possible. Like, look, I'm not going to debate this in public. He's my family, and I love him, and he's so strong, and I don't want to get him in danger. This is the smartest way to do it. Because number one, all of that is at least semi-easy to understand for people. Like, yeah, I get you wouldn't want to debate your family in public, but like, yeah, I mean, like, it is pretty bad that he's critiquing you there. But the other thing is, JD Vance will probably get dragged through the mud if he was to actually like go toe-to-toe with this. I mean, they're not going to have like a Piers Morgan debate. Oh my God, could you imagine? Could you imagine that? Piers Morgan, JD Vance versus his cousin, the Russian invasion of Ukraine, how to end it. Oh my goodness. But no, he probably knows that it's probably not, it's not smart to go out there and debate the guy who makes the war his life 24/7, because he probably knows a lot more than you, and he has a lot more on the line than you. And so there's no reason to go out there and engage with it. And it's only going to be more painful if you get hit and it hurts, if it ends up being your own family member. So I think he probably responded the smartest way, even if it is a turtle shell approach. One last thing. I keep saying one last thing, but one last thing. Did you guys see this JD Vance Slava Ukraini hate mob story that he talked about? JD Vance released this tweet on March 8th after aid was suspended and cut off. Today, while walking my 3-year-old daughter, a group of Slava Ukraini protesters followed us around and shouted as my daughter grew increasingly anxious and scared. I decided to speak with the protesters in the hopes that I could trade a few minutes of conversation for them for leaving my toddler alone. Nearly all of them agreed. It was a mostly respectful conversation, but if you're chasing a 3-year-old as part of a political protest, you're a shit person. Chasing a 3-year-old is how it was described. Let me show you the footage that is available online of what happened. So first, here is footage of the protesters across the street from where the vice president is going.
Again here at the J.D. Vance's house, Vice President of the United States, here at William Howard Taft and Columbia Parkway. The police have the roadways blocked off to regular traffic. You have to be a special person to drive down the public roadway here today and tomorrow. While the president and vice president is in town, they have their canine units. There's Ohio State Highway Patrol, along with Secret Service, and since I have police here on scene, they have a tent up there in the middle of the roadway. Guess they're having a party or something, and they got their portalets out there. But the road is closed. William Howard Taft is closed while the vice president is in town here. And currently protesters out here, approximately 100 protesters have showed up here today to have their voices heard.
So the closest we could find to footage, because I went through all the footage that guy posted. I went through it all and trying to find this harassment of the daughter, right? Trying to like figure out like where they followed his daughter around, chasing it. It said chasing his daughter, wasn't it? Chasing a 3-year-old is the way he put it. Like they're chasing them down the street. And I mean, you can look through all this. It's all available publicly. We're just clicking through it quickly. The closest I could find was this. This is him in the same place with these protesters talking to him. And I don't see the chasing. I mean, maybe the chasing was off camera and nobody caught it. But I mean, he's there with security detail. You determine for yourself if it looks like they were chasing his daughter and if his daughter is anxious and scared and terrified and such. Well, he didn't say terrified, anxious and scared.
What we called up, they said, the Russians said, was an illegal war there. Well, sir, I agree with you. Actually, the Russians do have some manpower problems. The Ukrainians have more manpower problems. Their armies are larger, they have more population, they have more military males and females. Exactly why we should be supporting them.
Like, don't you think it's up to the Ukrainians to decide what they want to do?
Well, again, their support, their ability to continue fighting is heavily dependent on the Americans.
Right, so you're yanking for what the people are dying.
What I told the gentleman earlier is that we think it's in the best interest of our country, and frankly in the best interest of the Ukrainians to stop. No one's articulated a strategy.
Absolutely.
Respectfully, I disagree. I think that what we're doing is we're actually forcing a diplomatic settlement. That if you talk to Joe
Nobody in Ukraine benefits. No one.
Do
you think Russia can be diplomatic?
About the United States.
Can you be just the ally?
This is about a separate country, and I don't think our investment in that country can go on indefinitely. I understand the disagree.
You're forcing settlement.
We're forcing both the Russians and the Ukrainians.
Russia won't settle.
Exactly. They certainly invaded Ukraine in 2022.
And
But there needs to be a settlement.
They
Ma'am,
are the aggressor every time.
ma'am, I understand that that's your view, and certainly they have.
Ooh, that's your view that they're the aggressor every time? That's it. Look, I haven't interrupted this because most of this is stuff we've heard before. Like, Ukraine has worse manpower problems, so we need to get them to get, like, it's all the same talking points from him usually. But when was Ukraine the aggressor? When did Ukraine aggress? I don't remember them invading in 2014. I don't remember them invading in 2022. What does he mean by, I understand that's your view. Is it just he doesn't want to talk about the specific? I mean, like, it's a simple, simple statement that they've always been the. You can be like, I mean, in the recent history, in the recent conflict, yeah. What would you object to that? I understand that's your view.
And certainly, I have condemned, ma'am, please, you're interrupting. I'm speaking with you and I'm trying to be respectful. I have condemned the invasion, but I've also condemned the perpetual. That is the policy of the administration. And I've talked to you guys now for about 5 minutes. And what I ma'am, now that's a different question. I'm happy. Would you like me to talk about how I've changed my view on Donald Trump from 10 years ago? Because I talked about it a lot during the campaign, and then the American people voted and made me the president of the United States.
You've got no integrity.
Some
integrity in our leaders. Not having any integrity. That's what I expect my kids.
It must be nice to go through life and see that everybody who disagrees with you has no integrity. I have more respect for you. But ma'am, look at my 3-year-old daughter now. And I told you, I talked to you for 5 minutes, and now I did not agree to have my 3-year-old to have people run around and yell at her. And I did talk to you, and I had said, if I talk to you for a few minutes, we leave my 3-year-old daughter alone, and you said yes. So I'd like you guys to respect that. Okay. Thank you.
Okay, so basically, I like, look, it's one thing to say, hey, it's annoying when I'm walking around with my family to be confronted with this. A life of public service is very annoying, especially when people are angry at you and they're protesting you, when go out in the public, because that's probably when the average person can't access you, because you're the vice president of the United States and they're not able to knock on your door and say, here's my opinion, sir, because you're not going to listen. Just like you're not listening to your own cousin when he calls your office. So they're certainly not going to be able to get you to listen to them unless they find you when you're out and about and they protest you and they let you know that way. And they do it with enough people as you're driving by that you're able to see very clearly that public opposition is building, so that maybe you'll be more mindful, so you won't make crazy decisions selling out this or selling out that. Now, you could say that's annoying when you're with your kids, but look, and you can even say man, kitty, I'm walking around with my kid, I don't like that they're bothering me. The idea that I mean, I didn't see the kid's face anxious and scared. They look, I mean, I couldn't see their face. They looked like almost like half asleep. They weren't moving. I don't know, like anxious and scared. And it's one thing to say, I want to be on my own with my daughter and be able to walk around and have that level of privacy. I understand that. You also knew those protesters were out there when you went out there, okay? Because they were clearly waving flags around and stuff like that. And they didn't, I just don't see, they didn't chase your daughter. They chased you. Don't make it about chasing your daughter. Don't make it be like, oh my God, they yelled at my daughter. Are you gonna stop yelling at my daughter? They're not yelling at their daughter. They're yelling at you, and you are walking around with your daughter in the one time that they'd ever be able to talk to you. Not to mention, like, they engage and then they stop. They do the whole like, yeah, okay, well, whatever. You want to be with your daughter, it is what it is. It's not like they don't think, it's not like they think they're gonna convince you. They're not here to convince you. They're here to make you sure that you know that people are against what you're doing, and that, you know, this isn't going to be quiet if you just try to sell Ukraine down the river. You're not going to be able to like inspire JD all of a sudden like, oh my God, you're right. The Russians are not easy to trust and negotiate. Oh my God. That's not going to change. So it's to show opposition. And that's when they would be able to access them. It's one thing to say it's annoying. It's another thing to say they were chasing your daughter, okay? You don't need to be such a, what's the word? Soft? Soft. I put this in my video this morning. Good catch, Merc. Security guarantees.